So I have a personal entanglement story, using entanglement very loosely as a metaphor. But when I thought about the conference and this talk, and the talk is about the secrets of the heart, I was remembering a very touching and mysterious experience I had years ago. So I thought I would start with a story, a true story. So in 1981, when I was a graduate student in San Francisco working on, just beginning my doctoral research dissertation, it was on dreams by people who were close to death. And I was reading a book late one night by a man who had been in Jungian analysis, and he had collected his dreams and they'd been published posthumously. And there was a particular dream that struck me very deeply. In it, he dreamt that he was on his deathbed, and around him were everyone that he had loved deeply in his life. And he had an exchange with each person. And there was something about this dream, and it happened a week or two before he died, that really touched me. And so I became interested in doing the experiment myself. So I put the book down and I laid down on my bed. And I'd actually, as I was thinking of sharing this story, I want to invite you actually, if you want, to visualize the same. Imagine that you're on your deathbed, laid out. You have a few hours left to live. Your eyes are closed. And from your heart, you invite every important person who's touched you deeply to appear. Just take a minute and see who comes. You have only a few hours. Can you feel what happens? The depth of this experiment? So what happened for me was very surprising, because rather than my parents, who I would expect to appear first, a high school friend, my best friend from high school, appeared. And we had been very close for a number of years, and then 5 years before, we'd had a falling out. We'd both been part of the same spiritual organization, and I left the organization, and I think this was very disappointing for him. And he did something that I felt betrayed my trust. And so we both pulled away from each other. And it had been 5 years since we had contact. So he appeared in my inner deathbed visualization. And I felt myself moved to forgive him. I really didn't want anything in the way of this love that we had once had. The curious thing was, as I began to sincerely forgive him for his betrayal of me, I realized he felt exactly the same toward me. He had felt betrayed by me. It was quite an interesting insight. It's like the bottom dropped out of my position, of being the one who's the generous one and giving forgiveness. It totally reversed. And I found myself asking him for his forgiveness. And once I did, I offered mine to him. And there was a release in the heart area, a kind of clearing of a holding, a knot that I'd held for 5 years. So it was a very cleansing kind of experience. And the most dramatic that evening, I dialogued with a number of different people, and that was the evening. And the next day was rather ordinary. And the day after in the morning, I was working in a mental health clinic in San Francisco, and I got a call. Can you guess from whom? It's from my friend. And I was so amazed, so touched. And he told me that the morning before, now remember, I was in San Francisco. He was in San Jose, here, because I grew up in this area. He was driving along the freeway. He thought of me and burst into tears. And he was crying so hard he had to pull the car over on the side of the freeway. Just in this grief and this love that was spontaneously emerging from his heart. So he tracked me down. He got my number from my mom and called me up, and I was delighted and amazed to hear from him. And we reconciled, and I invited him to be one of my groomsmen at the wedding the following year. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? And it's an illustration, I think, of how deeply connected we can be, even when we're out of awareness of that. Like, there are dimensions of the heart that we know little about, and yet they're so powerful and so nurturing. You know, Karen was talking about this, you know, just the beauty of coming together and what's shared in that meeting. And this is such an important part of the human experience. In a rather simple way, I think of the spiritual journey being largely a movement of attention from here to here, from the head to the heart. I know this is overly simplistic. It's more than that. It's not just the heart. It's the whole body, right? And it's not just the whole body. It's the whole world. And there are dimensions of the heart that are more and more refined and non-local. But in a very simple way, this is like the radical shift. The most important shift is, where is our attention seated? Here, in our thinking, in our story, in our self-image, or here, in our deep feeling knowing, our deep feeling understanding of what's real and what's most important. So I wanted to say a little bit about what tends to get in the way, or what kind of obstacles we may encounter, particularly as students of non-dual teachings, as probably most of you are, and certainly that I have been for many years. Because there are many subtle areas of fixation in terms of the mind, and we may not be aware of them. So it's helpful actually to be more aware, to kind of see where attention can fixate and where we can identify on subtle but very important levels. For instance, it's fairly easy to have a good intellectual understanding of non-duality, right? The primordial awareness prior to the apparent appearance of subject and object. That's pretty easy to grasp intellectually, and if we do, we may think that we actually understand what a non-dual realization is. I'm speaking from my own experience now, kind of tracking it over the years. That's one way attention can fixate, on an intellectual representation. Another is if we've been a meditator for some years and we're used to observing the objects of awareness, such as thought or feeling or sensation, and feel ourselves as a kind of quiet witness or observer. This is a trap that long-term meditators get caught in, and of which I was one for many years. Where we take ourselves as a separate witness or observer, but very subtle I mean, so quiet, so subtle that we don't even know we're in a position as this watcher or knower. Maybe some of you know this. So attention can fixate and identification there. Maybe we've had an authentic glimpse, a parting of the veil, a dissolution of the subject-object split, a sense of non-separateness that's quite genuine. That's temporary or brief and passes. And then we identify with that rather than just noticing where our experience is in this moment. Another place of fixation. And maybe we have a mental awakening. There's a real gravitational shift in our identity from thinking and any mental representation. And we know ourselves deeply as open, empty awareness. And we think, I am the awake one. I know, and you don't. Right? This is narcissism, very subtle spiritual narcissism, and it's an easy place to get stuck. Right? The mind so easily apprehends direct experience and formulates it into an identity. And this too is a subtle localization. The hallmark of a mental awakening is the sense of infinite space, tremendous spaciousness and inner freedom. But in a way, it's just the beginning of the awakening process. This wakefulness needs to drop down, needs to drop into the heart and the belly and the core of the body and radiate out as well. So this brings us back to the heart and kind of some of the, what I would call the architecture or maybe geology of the heart. Because as we explore the heart, it's a bit like an archaeological dig. Have you noticed? I work mainly as a psychotherapist and do some spiritual mentoring. But it's very interesting, as attention deepens in the heart, it goes to earlier and earlier experience within a certain band. So it's like a dig, you get those early imprints or fossils as you go earlier and earlier in the developmental process. So there are different levels of the heart, and I wanted to speak a little bit, it's such a short talk, about those and what I've discovered. There's an egoic level, and this is concerned with our self-image and our self-story and how we feel about ourselves. Right? Am I okay? These are the questions of the separate self. Am I okay? Do you like me? Do you approve of me? Do you love me? Do you respect me? Right? And this actually goes very deeply. The heart is an incredibly sensitive instrument. So vulnerable, so sensitive. And it registers all the shocks of neglect and abandonment and abuse growing up. And it closes down very often. It's like to survive, really, in this challenging environment, we learn to guard our hearts. I think all of us have had this experience. Is it safe to open my heart or not? So it really requires tenderness and understanding for these layers of the heart to soften, to open, for these veils to begin to lift. But often we're encountering things like holes. And it's actually an honor to be with you, Hamid, today, because Hamid Ali is the originator of the theory of holes, which I read about 25 years ago, and said, that's it, right? This is what I'm experiencing sitting with clients. There are these areas of deficiency of essential qualities, areas that shut down, and the heart is one of the main areas where this happens. The interesting thing is when you go into these places of emptiness and darkness, if you are able to tolerate them, bring your attention there, they start unfolding, starts melting, and some essential quality begins to show itself. It's a beautiful process. I imagine all of you have experienced this at some time or another, to go into these areas of woundedness or apparent deficiency, and then discover a beautiful essential quality. So the heart, as we go through these doors and these veils, in the very back of the heart, there's this beautiful radiance that begins to shine. It's like we're getting to the core, the essence of the human individual. And each has a unique expression. Karen was talking about this as well, and I find this to be very true. A unique expression of universal consciousness, and a capacity for remarkable intimacy. This is such an important part of our human experience, is to open the depths of our heart and feel this intimacy. Think of Rumi and Shams, right? What an amazing transformation Rumi underwent after shutting the door and spending, how many days was it? 90? Perhaps fewer, someone knows, I don't know. 90 days, tremendous transformation. Likely they spent a lot of time gazing at one another, right? This is where we feel the deepest joy, the greatest generosity and compassion. This beautiful, tender, deep depth of the heart. Interestingly, though, this is not the end. It's like if we keep going into the depths of the heart, it opens up even further. It's like often it opens up backwards into this huge space, vast space. Sometimes forward first, eventually all around. And then we're in the realm of what I would call the universal heart, the cosmic heart, the great heart. And this is the place of knowing all is well, knowing our essential non-separateness from everything. It's a place of fullness. Any sense of lack and deficiency has dissolved. And very interestingly, it's a place that can hold the collective suffering of humanity. Have any of you touched that place? Like, it's very interesting to sit with people, either my clients or people I spiritually mentor. And they get to a place and they say, I feel this suffering, but it's not mine. It doesn't feel personal. I know the difference. I know my own suffering. This feels collective. This feels like humanity's. Do you know this? It's an interesting place. And as they open to it, it's like, I can't handle this. It's too much. In a way, it's true. In a way, the individual heart is not equipped to deal with the collective suffering. But something, we'll call it a thing, it's not a thing. Something is. This great heart, this cosmic heart, bears the collective suffering. Not only bears it, but is able to transmute it, takes it in, and transmutes. And this is the movement of redemptive love. So the heart has these extraordinary capacities for connection, for intimacy, and for the embrace of our collective suffering. I think the most important thing is in this journey from the head to the heart is our honesty. That is to say, being in integrity with our own experience, being a lover of the truth, and our vulnerability, our willingness to experience whatever it is that arises in our experience. That keeps us honest. That keeps us congruent. That keeps this process of opening fresh and alive and dynamic. It's an essential ingredient in this non-journey of discovering who we really are. So I think that's as much as I wanted to say. I wanted to leave a little time for, how much time do we have, by the way? About 5 minutes. If there are any responses or questions, I think we may have a mic floating around, or maybe if you speak up, I can repeat your question. No?
You have left us speechless.
Please use the microphone because this is live streamed, so people want to hear your questions. Gail, can you hand over the mic to the one who's going to ask?
I'm sorry, who's speaking? Could you raise your hand?
I didn't have a question. I said
Okay.
You left us speechless since no one raised their hands. No, you left us speechless.
Yeah, I heard that. Rendered you speechless. Well, I'm kind of speechless too. Okay, someone over here.
Well, I don't know that this is a question, but the feeling that I've been getting at this conference is the kind of, and I was getting it when you were speaking too, is that just being, and I didn't hear Karen's talk, unfortunately, but I think it would have been a good one to hear, about just being what you really are. I mean, I don't know how to say that without just sounding kind of simplistic, but that is what, in other words, instead of trying to follow some list of things that I should do, it's almost like a coming back inside and just letting that blossom or
Yes.
bloom or...
Forget the shoulds.
Yeah, it's like the 60s were right, you know?
Yeah.
And it's pretty amazing, really, because it has no, there has to be a bravery even when you're shaking in your boots, you know, because you really don't know what you're doing whatsoever.
Trust the shaking.
Yeah.
Right?
Because
It's a letting go, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because all the shoulds are an attempt to control our experience. Right? And it creates distance from our experience. It's very interesting what happens when the should and the should nots fall away. Right? We become intimate with our experience, welcoming of our experience, allowing of our experience as it is, right? Without an agenda of some ideal imposed upon it. And then it can move spontaneously on its own. So in a way, let ourselves be as we are.
Well, yeah, and it's been happening for so long that it's an armor that just keeps us, you know, every time you even just want to do something different or speak to someone you don't know, or there's always this thing saying, no, you know, can't do that. People will think you're weird or whatever it is.
And so, you know, what you're speaking to is self-trust and the value of spontaneity, right? It's like not being willing to not know what's going to happen and listening and following to something, you know, much quieter but much more direct in terms of how we're moved, right? And sometimes we'll be moved to be quiet, and sometimes we'll be moved to make contact, right? There's no rules here. But our lives, it's like kicking off the training wheels, right?
And also the not knowing what to do whatsoever, to be okay with
The not normal view?
the not knowing what to do.
Not knowing what to do.
Because there's always this
Yeah.
thing, there's always this thing driving me. I'm sure it's the kind of, what is it in the cage, the gerbil? It's not a gerbil. It's a
Gerbil,
squirrel,
yeah.
a hamster.
Hamster, yeah.
But, you know, it thinks that just motion provides some kind of intelligence, which of course it doesn't.
Which it doesn't.
No, sadly.
Right. So it's like the conditioned mind is like that revolving cage, isn't it? Right? And interestingly, as we gain the capacity to see that operating, right, we're already getting off the wheel as well. And then something fresh can begin to happen. Then a creative life begins to emerge. Right? And I think this is another aspect that's maybe not sufficiently emphasized in non-dual gatherings and teachings. It's one thing to awaken to who we are. It's another to embody and live it as well. Equally important is the creative expression as a human being. Otherwise, it's imbalanced, you know? And it's like, where does that come from, you know, that movement?
You just read my mind, because I was thinking, what we tend to do is hear this and go, yeah, that hits this really, but how could I possibly do that when I go to work? You know, but that's not, that it is possible. That's where the bravery comes.
There's courage involved, isn't there? So I see we're out of time, and I want to thank you very much for listening.